the Map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting in the Mappable USA studios in Las Vegas. And as usual, we're talking about crowdfunding and different ways of getting money and raising money. And if we're going to talk crowdfunding, we have to bring in Mr. Crowdfund, Ron Sukenick from Simply Go Public. Ron, how you doing today?
Well, thank you so much, Ron Costa, Mappable USA. And I'll tell you, I've been really enjoying the times to co-host with you. And in fact, I've always enjoyed just listening to the podcast. And I'll tell you, your guest today, this guy Zale out of Toronto. Wow. Well, I think it's Toronto. Maybe it's Toronto. There's vertical farms and opportunity zone stuff. And I'm really interested in listening to this guy. And he's built such a strong connection base, certainly on LinkedIn, but he's got thousands of people that are interested in what he's doing. So I'm anxious to hear this.
Yeah, you know, we talk about crowdfunding all the time. There's so many different industries for it. And, of course, real estate crowdfunding is very, very popular, and everybody kind of wants to get into that. We've done a number of podcasts already, Ron, on opportunity zones. And basically opportunity zones is a form of real estate crowdfunding in that people are looking for funds to place their money in. There's always a tax incentive for that. And you know, when you talk about these funds, a lot of people are really, you know, you're straight real estate, you're building a building, you're doing a development, et cetera. Today, we've got Zale Tabakman on the line. Zale, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited.
Yeah, you know, because you guys are running an opportunity zone fund that really is very unique in that it's in the field of what I understand to be, what is it, urban farming? Is that what they call it, or what's the terminology on that?
Whole bunch of names, indoor vertical farming, controlled agriculture, environments, urban farming. It fits into a number of categories, especially around impact investing, because it's essentially a farm in the middle of a city. And when you tie it with the opportunity zones things, you end up putting fresh, healthy food sitting in the food deserts, you know, areas where there is no access to food. People have to drive or take a bus miles to get food. And we're basically creating fresh, available food right down in downtown cores.
Well, there's a lot of areas in the country that definitely are like that, where people do have to drive a long way to go to the grocery store or anything like that. So I could definitely see need for that. But you know, Zale, what's your background? How did you kind of get into this?
Okay, so up here in Canada, we have this tax incentive, which is like the OZ, where if a company is developing a new technology and they're overcoming a technological barrier, they can get tax money back for money they spent. So, for example, you know, a guy's doing essentially R&D to overcome a technical challenge. And they spend $100,000, the government will give them back close to $50,000 if they've actually spent that money, and it's a tax benefit. And my particular skill for many years is providing consulting to companies like that. So I'm dealing a lot with companies developing new technologies and putting them all together. And it turns out I had a couple of clients that were incredibly cool. One of the clients is a sandwich manufacturer. So you imagine that you're a great chef and you set up sandwich manufacturing for high-end hotels and whatever. And you basically, this guy was doing like 3,000 sandwiches a day. And these were, you know, very good. These aren't your peanut butter and jam thing. These are high-end sandwiches for high-end restaurants. And every restaurant, of course, would have its own flavor profile. And what happens is he was developing these sandwiches, and he would use certain vegetables in them in the salad, but he always had to have multiple choices for it. So for the lettuce, for example, you know, he wanted a red Russian kale as one of his components of the salad. But if he couldn't get red Russian kale, he'd have to switch it with something else. If you switch out one kale for another kale, it affects the taste, the texture, and blah, 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 blah. And I can get really nerdy about it. But without getting too nerdy, he had this problem. There was another client I had that was involved in putting air into water, which is called dissolved oxygen. Again, without getting too nerdy, when you add dissolved oxygen to water, everything grows much, much better. Plants grow better, fish will grow faster, everything will be great. And I live in Toronto, and Toronto is a northern climate. climate's very much like New York City or Baltimore or Philadelphia, that kind of, winter. And we have and so we import a lot of our food into Canada, just like New York imports it from California. I'm going to try to make it very American because I assume mostly Americans are there listening. But so essentially you're bringing food in, and I was looking at all these roofs, and I was thinking, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if we could, use this dissolved oxygen? I could up the growth of the vegetables, and I could solve this other guy's problem and do it on the roofs. And then when I started running the numbers, and now we're getting into real business, I started running the numbers. I couldn't make enough money on the roof to even pay rent, reasonable rent to the guy's roof. So I said, but what happens if I could grow more stuff per square foot, and then I could get more income from every square foot and drive that income, and then all of a sudden I could pay my rent and everything else. And I discovered that this is back in 2013, back in the dark ages, I discovered everybody else was trying to solve the same problem. And that's how I got entered into the world of indoor vertical farming. And then, once you start going down that path, we ended up looking at, okay, where's the biggest margins? Where are the profit margins? And it turns out that the largest profit margin is in packaged salads, ready-to-eat salads. That bag of salad, it comes in a bag, you open it up, it comes in a clamshell, you open it up, you dump it into your bowl, and you start to eat it. It's called ready-to-eat. 85% of Americans buy that, and that product is roughly, anywhere from $15 to $20 a pound. If you buy it, as you paying, you pay 5 ounces, you pay $4.99, $3.99, whatever you're paying for it. And you can buy that same thing, the components, at $2 or $3 a pound across the aisle. But everybody's in a rush, everybody's in a hurry, and most of the time people buy a bunch of salad stuff and end up throwing it all out. So effectively, it's cheaper to buy a packaged salad. And that's how I got. And then so, might as well finish my story here. I believe in starting with the end in mind. For us older folks, you'll know where that came from. Anyways, you start with the end in mind. I want to start with packaged salads. I want to do indoor vertical farming. And so I got my starting point, I got my ending point, and then 5 years later, and a large amount of money, we figured out how to solve the problem. And we have a patent pending on the technology.
Well, let me ask you something, Zale. Vertical farming is somewhat of a new innovation, at least in my mind. And it's a big part of a solution for, I would think, the rising demand for food, limited natural resources. So I'm just curious. You seem to have this passion behind it. You're building it out. What's the vision? What's the big vision? What is it that you want to do in vertical farming? And what are the resources that you need to grow it and build it and expand it around? I would think you want to go around the country, I would think, not just Canada. And I think you're building out something, vertical farming here in the States, correct?
Yeah, my focus as a Canadian company, and you need to ask me why I want to stay as a Canadian company, but putting that aside, my vision is the United States, and it's essentially putting a indoor vertical farm in every one of those 8,700 opportunity zones. Let's not forget about the opportunity zones. We want to put a vertical farm within 2 hours of every one of our customer base. I find it, we can expand on this. For example, I find it, I can grow vegetables in New York and feed people in New York at the same cost of that salad instead of shipping it across the United States. So that was a little convoluted. Make it a little simpler. Typically, you buy a salad in November, December, January, and it comes from components that came from California. So you got to ship it all the way from California to New York City. That salad, $1 of that, every dollar, 50 cents is basically in transportation. And now with the new rules of the truckers and everybody else, I love these rules. Truckers should not work more than 12 hours a day. It's disgusting, right? So, but if you think about it, for me, those truckers driving 14 hours, the reduction from 14 hours to 12 hours increases the cost of shipping from California to New York City. So I get to grow a product in New York City at the same cost as it is in California, and I get to sell it in New York City. So the difference, all that shipping and all the handling and all the profit margin that goes between California and New York ends up in our investor's pocket. So that makes our margins extremely high. I like margins. Margins and profit is very important to people who are in business. And on top of that, because we're growing indoor, we don't have to use any herbicides, insecticides, pesticides. So we don't have any of those costs associated with herbicides, insecticides, pesticides. And back to that, I mentioned at the top of the show, the impact investing. We also don't have any of the junk that goes rolling out into the lakes and rivers, which is called runoff, which calls things like algae bloom and everything else. So essentially, I make higher margins. I have my carbon cost, which is for environmentalists, is extremely low, and I have a healthier product that we can essentially harvest in the morning and eat in the evening, which right now from California is 2-3 days. And we're talking California, we're talking Mexico, Arizona, Florida. So I keep talking about the New York to California story because it's a big story, but any dense population works. So Chicago, we talk to people in Minneapolis, all the way down Atlanta. We're talking to a fellow now in South Carolina. So our rollout is right across the country. You asked me about the grand vision. The grand vision is to sell to the chains. We talked to one chain that has 2,000 restaurants right across the United States. They, of course, require, if I'm going to be local, I got to be local in every one of those chains. There's the big boys, of course, like the McDonald's and the Wendy's, but there's a lot of chains at the second level and the third level tier. And then there are hotel chains, and there are hospital chains, and there are old folks' homes, and there hospitals, universities, and everybody wants local. So that's the grand vision of it.
So let me understand something, Zale. So let's say somebody so you're looking for people that want to manage a vertical farm like in New York, are these investors or operators? Or what's the challenge for you to make that happen? What's the missing piece right now for you in your business?
Okay, so every farm will be a licensed farm, meaning that we'll have somebody who lives in New York and will own the farm, and we'll provide exactly how they're supposed to operate it. It's a license. We don't use the F word at all. It's a licensed model because we're finding the customers, but that fellow or lady or gal owns the farm. And they provide the people, and they follow our procedures, and they do everything else. But what happens is we make a deal with the customer. The customer pays Local Grown Salads, and Local Grown Salads pays the farm owner to do that. You asked me what's stopping us right now. We need to start rolling out our network, and one farm at a time, and get our first customers, which will be smaller clients. I mean, we actually talked to somebody in, I think it was Cincinnati, that had 70 restaurants, locations in that area. So there's a lot of little tiny chains that are very local. Anyhow, so we need to start rolling out our story and start building up. You guys keep forgetting to talk about opportunity zones, but opportunity zones are really great places. Our technology fits in under 14-foot to the joist, which means that buildings that are built in the early 1900s are great buildings for us as long as they have good environmentals and nothing in the air that's bad. So we can take old buildings and reuse them. So it's another, on the impact side, we create jobs locally. We get lots of excitement from the cities. Most cities have food policy councils or something along that line that want to create jobs and want food local and feed people.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the opportunity zones in general, and I'm wondering how did you find out about those to begin with, Zale? Did somebody? How'd you get into it?
Well, it's really interesting. We actually just started because we were all looking for investors and partners to take us forward, right? Because there's a number of components for this. And somebody said, "Hey, there's this new tax thing." This is like almost a year ago. there's this new tax thing that's coming called opportunity zones. And so we started jumping on it. And, we found some some articles written by some great lawyers who described it and described the tax benefits. And I was thinking, wow, this, it's like the Senate created it for me, because we're designed for these old buildings. I'm thinking, wow, this is unbelievable, because each one of our farms are separate businesses, which they would then qualify as a qualified opportunity zone business. And, we put about $2 million worth of technology into one of these buildings. So that counts as the gross up on the building. And I'm not sure if I'm using the right term, but the improvement on the building. Mm-hmm. So we fit well with all that need. And a lot of these buildings are just sitting empty. And we can immediately, somebody writes us a check, we have site control. And in theory, if everything were to go the way it's supposed, the way we plan it, which, anybody who's ever planned anything knows it doesn't always work that way. But within, 60 days, the farm is built. 30 days later, we're harvesting and selling food. So like 90 to 150 days. I'm really told to say 150 days. So publicly, I say 150 days. But internally in my head, it's a lot faster.
Yeah, well, you talked about growth before. You talked about the potential growth in that. And as you mentioned, there's about 8,700 opportunity zones. So, man, if you can take a fraction of that, you'd be on the right track for sure. One thing I'm wondering, though, is something that, with respect to the growing of the salads and everything, I guess your main concerns as far as expenses go would be, what, electricity and temperature control?
No. Our main cost is people. Is paying people salaries. We're using LED technology. LED technology is really cheap for the amount of. You actually measure it by light. So for your dollar. I mean, I'm getting nerdy again. So they use words like lumens. So lumens are how you measure light. So right. your dollar per lumen. There's two costs, obviously. There's your CapEx, your capital expenses, and your OpEx, your operating expenses. So both of those are dropping like I don't know what, like things drop. They follow Moore's law. They're doubling and going half in price. They're doubling in speed. So in terms of light, the amount of light you get, and it's dropping in half in price. And when I first started, I started with fluorescent lights because I couldn't afford to buy LED lighting to do testing. And now the LED lighting is so cheap that it's be foolish not to. We also build our own lighting systems. So we buy all the raw components. So we buy LED strips from wherever we want to buy them from, typically Korea or China, depending on the quality. And then we buy power supplies from wherever we need to do, and then we put them all together, and we build our own lighting systems. So we don't go out to the main guys like Philips or Osram or any of those guys. We're actually constructing our own lighting systems, which really drives down the CapEx of our farms. You'd mentioned some of the competitors out there. Most of the competitors buy lighting systems. We create our own.
Yeah, Zale, so I understand this. Is the investor also one and the same as an operator, or are you looking to bring in investors?
Okay, that's a good question. So let's break out the different components. So there is LGS, Local Grown Salads. That's our company. That's like the mothership, so to speak. And then every farm is an independent entity, and the farm sits in a building. So that's a separate building. So there's a different number of options to go by. Local Grown Salads is the one company. The farm could be owned by Local Grown Salads. It could also be owned by a local operator, but Local Grown Salads could manage it for that local operator. Or the investor could put up the money for the farm, and he could partner with a social enterprise like a CDFI or a LISC. There's a lot of, because these farms are going to be in opportunity zones, there's a lot of people in the community who would like to be partners and operate. So the owner and the operator of the farm could be two separate groups. And then, of course, there's the building owner who might own the building, which could be another person. So, or it could be one entity can own the building, can own the farm, and can operate it as well. So there's lots of kind of models that work all equally well. In taking the opportunity zone model, so for example, you could have an opportunity zone fund. So, Susie can put her capital gains into the opportunity zone fund. The fund would buy the building. The fund would own the farm, and the farm would pay the opportunity zone fund. The rent would pay a royalty on, an interest on for the payment back of the equipment, and then the fund would pay back Susie her returns.
So you have a fund that is it's a revenue model?
Yeah,
there's no equity. It's not an equity crowd fund.
Well, okay, right now, I just want to be very clear. We haven't set it because there's a lot of legal things that are going on here. We haven't physically set up a fund yet.
Okay.
An opportunity zone fund is not the same thing as a typical fund. You need to distinguish. They use the term opportunity zone fund, but it's just basically a registration of a piece of paper. It's not a fund like SEC would call a fund where that's run that's a REIT, for example, is a fund. It's a different type of fund. It uses the term fund. It's just physically a bunch of money that's allocated in an opportunity zone. So the word fund gets a little confusing there.
Yeah, the opportunity zone fund is the entity that makes the investments into the opportunity zone, I believe. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really think is really amazing about opportunity zone funds, both in a good and a bad way, is that they can be self-certified. Basically, anybody really can create one. So you guys have created a fund already. You've gotten all the paperwork done. How easy of a process was that?
No, we do not have our fund. That's what I'm trying to say. We do not have our fund.
Okay.
We have it designed, but we do not have it. We do not. So, for example, if Susie wants to send me a check, we would not be able to accept her check, and we're not asking for her check. Got it. But I can tell you a little bit what's involved in a fund. And I strongly recommend this. Let's say some entity wants to create a fund. So you'd want to have a fund administrator, which would be a third party. There's a couple of companies out there that will do that. So they'll make sure that they'll do the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the money is actually going to be legal, that you get all the tax receipts and they'll get all the paperwork that you would need to do. So that would be a fund administrator, and they're just paid on a percentage basis or a number basis, but they're essentially a legal somebody who's looking after the legal aspects of it and the accounting aspects of it. You'd also need a bank to take the money, and the money would go into an escrow account until it would be released according to the fund administrator. Then you have the fund owner who then takes the money from the escrow account and then starts to spend it accordingly. So you want to, setting up these things is kind of expensive, and then you need to follow through. To do it properly, you should have a PPM set up, private placement memorandum, which is around a $50,000, investment to set that up. And we're talking to people, and when we have all the pieces together, we've got all the components to put together. It's not that complicated to do, but it's you want to do it right, and you want to make sure. From your investor's point of view, you want to make sure all these components are in place, because you're really putting away the money, and most of these, to get the best tax advantage, it's a 10-year time period.
Right.
It's a 5 and 7 years when you have to pay. The first is 5 years or 7 years when you get the tax deduction on the OZF, but it's really 10 years when you're going to start to really get your money back and everything's going to come back to you. And you don't want to find out 10 years from now that it wasn't done properly at the beginning, and all of a sudden you have this massive tax bill.
Right.
Right.
Let me ask you this, Zale, if I can, because this is, this might have to be a 2 or a 3-part podcast, but if people listening to the podcast is interested in learning more speaking with you, connecting with you, getting involved with you, where do you want them to go? Do you want them to go to localgrownsalads.com? Is that a place that you want people to go to?
Yes, yeah. And there's a form there called OZF, and they can just fill in the form and send me an email and describe what they're doing. And then we can, from there we can start a conversation. We can send them, pro formas and a detailed description of what we're kind of doing and all the background stuff.
So you're talking about localgrownsalads.com, and then your email address, if I'm correct, is Zale, Z-A-L-E, at localgrownsalads.com. Yep.
That's pretty easy to get a hold of. Zale, I have one more question for you before we go. You mentioned the opportunity zones, and really it's a great resource for you guys, a good vehicle for you to raise money and do what you need to do. Did you give any thought about going by like the Reg D route or the Reg A plus or anything like that? Did that enter your mind at all?
We've looked at the Reg D. The Reg D is really interesting. The Reg D is probably where we're probably going to head to, depending on what happens. And there's even a place that you can do the opportunity zones. You can do a Reg D offering, and those shares can be actually traded. I don't know how it'll affect the OZF stuff, but there are people that are now looking at letting you trade around and have some liquidity. Reg D gives you liquidity. The other ones don't get you the liquidity. Now, remember, I'm not an accountant and I'm not a lawyer, so everything you say, everything I say is, Zale's understanding of it. But, there's a lot of issues. There's issues around liquidity because, back to that Susie model, Susie puts her money in, but maybe Susie in 6 months needs her money back. And if it wasn't a Reg D, it was like an LLC, she may not be able to get her money back, or she may not be able to have access to her money. So Reg D makes it much easier for her to get her money out. And it's something, investors need to think about is the structure, and, God forbid they need their money, how do they, even if they got to pay the tax bill, how do they get at the money? So
that's a good point, and that's a point that, Ron, I know that you guys deal with every day at Simply Go Public. Isn't liquidity one of the biggest issues?
Well, it is. A lot of investors, there's the accredited and unaccredited investors, but a lot of investors love the idea of at least retaining what they put in. I mean, they want to get their return of their money back plus whatever else they can get. But for a lot of people, there's a lot of unaccredited investors that would probably be interested in what Zale is doing. By the way, Zale, just so you know, my son's got $1 million tree business in British Columbia, Surrey. British Columbia. Yeah, he's an arborist. He's a certified arborist. I was just curious because they've got the opportunity zone and the vertical farming. Are you growing anything out in British Columbia? Is that a target market for you?
British Columbia would be a very good target market. Opportunity zones are an American invention, not a Canadian thing. So they only go for American. And it's only applicable to American taxpayers. So in British Columbia, there's a city called Vancouver. It's about 2 to 3 million people. It's across the river from where Bill Gates lives. He, I think, waves on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But it's across from Seattle. But it actually happens to be about 3,000 miles from me. So it's sort of like, hey, I know a guy who lives in Los Angeles. You're American. You must know him, right?
Right.
I'll tell you, Zale, an audience, and I can't even imagine why Jeff Bezos at Amazon, with his purchase of Whole Foods, wouldn't be all over connecting with a guy like you. Have you had any conversations with Jeff?
You are so smart. But what happens is Jeff Bezos, who owns Whole Foods, is invested in a company called Plenty. They put they and SoftBank put $200 million into a company called Plenty, which is when I will stay at night, when I lie awake at night thinking about who I should be worried about, Plenty is the company I worry about. So Jeff Bezos has already invested in my competitor located in San Francisco.
Look at that.
Unbelievable.
And you're a very smart guy.
Well, I don't know if I'm smart. I'm just thinking, and I'm saying to myself, wow, what I mean, that story has got to be in your pitch deck when Bezos puts up that kind of money, but he's only worth $128 billion, so it's not like he's short of funds, and he's obviously taken over the world. The Amazon is rather large, but what a treat to meet you, Zale, and what an enormous project, and maybe there's a way. And I did make a comment earlier that you've got over 29,000 people on LinkedIn, and they're following you. Don't underestimate the power of finding an investor base on LinkedIn through the people that are, not everybody sees what you're doing, but what happens when you post something, when you do updates, it goes through your feed. And then when other people see you can have more followers than you have connections, because you're going to get cut off in about 600 and something more connections. You can't accept everybody, but you could get people to follow you after 30,000. But you should really look at using LinkedIn as a way to attract people. Plus, there are investor groups on LinkedIn that you can tap into. So keep that in mind in your journey.
I thank you. There was an article written in Best News about us, all about us. So we're getting a lot of contacts and people about that. Yeah, no, we're if we do something with the crowdfunding, which we have to discuss offline, we should see about doing that and accessing those people on the crowdfunding side. That would be really exciting.
Good. Yeah, that's a great strategy as well. So listen, folks, I think we're kind of running out of time here. Zale, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. We really appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us. It was really great, really informative. I think our listeners really got a good idea about what you're doing. It's a great, great project. I wish you all the best with this. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. And Ron, thank you for co-hosting. And everybody out there, you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast. We are at mappableiusa.com. Go to the website, scroll down the homepage, pick your favorite syndication source so you don't miss any episodes. If you want to be a guest like Zale did today, there's a guest area there. You can click on the link, and we'll see what we can do about getting you on the show. So once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you next time on another Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone.